Pecuniary interests? Seeing none. Motion to go as committee of the whole. Councillor Coleman, second by Councillor Chambers. All those in favor? Thank you. We sit. Robin?
So good evening through you, Mr. Mayor. Before I start, I just want to bring to your attention that we just handed out the list of approved debt to be issued beyond 2019. This was asked at the last meeting, so we weren't going to go through this. If council would like to debate this at a future date, we can direct staff to bring back a report. But just for your information, that is the list that was requested. So this presentation should be short and sweet, I hope. Just to recap where we left off at our last meeting. So we had a proposed 2020 net levy of $55,581,000. We did an increase to the supplementaries of $250,000. The net levy before decision packages was $55,331. $1,194,000 was approved in decision packages. We applied a contribution from the contingency rate stabilization reserve to come out to a proposed net levy, including decision packages, of $56,375,664. That led to an increase of 3.6%. on a median home valued at $350,000. So since that meeting, we do have more information which favorably impacts that levy increase. And just to recap, there was some discussion around inflation at the last meeting, and inflation for 2019 is expected to be 2%. I think some people thought it was lower than that at 1.7, but in fact, it is anticipated to be 2.0%. So this slide here is just a list of all the decision packages that were presented at the last meeting and what was approved and what wasn't. So in the green column where it says disposition, so anything that wasn't approved, there's comments there about what the decision was on each of those, whether it was deferred, defeated, just so that you all have that information. So like I just mentioned, we did receive additional information since the last meeting in regards to assessment. So the county receives the assessment roll in steps with a final returned tax roll from Npac to be received on December 10th. So that's tomorrow. We don't anticipate any changes with the final roll, but we do not get the final step until tomorrow. So the information received on November 28th, which was after our last meeting, indicated a median home value of $363 for 2020. So the median home value in 2019 was $350. So there's a change to the median home value. So using the updated information from Npac, the tax increase on a median home is now at 1.99%. So this is the updated graphic that outlines the value here at 1.99%. That includes the decision packages that you approved at the last meeting, approved in principle. So here you can see the 1.99% equates to $58.36 on a home valued at $363,000, bringing the 2020 tax bill to $2,984.62. So that is the end of my presentation. If there's any questions.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Robin. The 363, could you explain how that is composed? Is it more houses, more valuable houses added to the the stock of houses we had in 2018? Or has everybody's assessment gone up?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the Npac phases in assessment. So every year, the assessment is phased in over a 4-year period. So for 2020, it's the fourth year in the 4-year phase-in, so the values have changed for 2020. It also takes into account any additions or upgrades to people's property. So you might have one property that has increased at a rate higher than another.
So are you saying that every house has increased this year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, not necessarily. When you look at the overall, there's some houses that go down, some houses that go up.
Thank you. Good. Can I ask a...
Councillor Bell.
Thank you. Just a question about the 1.99%, which is wonderful. I just want to say that right out loud. Does that figure more or less apply to every house? I know a house that has its assessment has gone up, it may see it slightly differently. On average, every house will have gone up by about 1.99%.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if you look at the aggregate, the average is actually a slight amount lower than the 1.99. But that's not to say there's going to be houses that go up more than that because they have additions or what have you to increase their value.
So the median is beyond the 50% mark.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Ferrier.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. I'm just wondering if there's been any discussion with staff about maybe looking at the timing of the process for next year so that at the very least when we get to decision packages, maybe that debate and discussion can happen after we've received all the updated information like this, because I know next year too we're looking at a bit of a shakeup in the Npac piece. So could you speak to that through you, Mr. Mayor?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. Actually, the treasurer and I were actually just discussing that. And next year in particular is going to be a year with more unknowns because it will be the first year in the new 4-year assessment cycle. So I think we are planning to do it later next year for sure.
Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For you to General Manager Hewitt. The roll then we are going to receive tomorrow from Npac will show the newly updated assessments for all the properties in the county, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't anticipate any changes in what we receive tomorrow. We have been getting fairly good updated numbers all along, and I don't think what we got in the last step changed that drastically from the one before. So we aren't anticipating really any changes. Yeah.
Okay, I was wondering because I just thought maybe it may go down further, but
We're not anticipating that.
the percent levy increase of 5%, is that 5% increase in the levy mainly because we hired so many staff last year and now they're going to be full-time in 2020? Or what is the bulk of that additional 5%? I mean, I know we're giving a 1.75% increase for salaries and there's little things, but 5% is
So,
a big increase in their spending.
okay, so through you, Mr. Mayor, so at our first budget meeting, we did go through all the drivers that were contributing into that 5%. So there was things like, we have a big increase in insurance. We have the E-Ride program that is hitting our tax levy that we didn't have before.
That's right. Now I remember. Okay.
There's others, if they're in your binder as well.
It seems like eons ago. I'd forgotten all the budget drivers, so. Do you have the list there?
I do have the list. I can just quickly go over it if you like. There was the net impact of annualization of positions that were approved in the 2019 budget. There was other grid step increases, WSIB premium increases. Like I mentioned, the insurance and Brant E-Ride. We have to add in debenture servicing costs for the debt that was issued. and a decrease in boundary compensation. So those are the main things driving that.
A decrease, you said? Oh, right, a decrease.
That's correct. There's an annual decrease.
Thank you. I think I have that page, Mr. Mayor. Yeah. I can look it up. Thank you. Thank you, Robin.
Through you, Your Worship, maybe further to that, it's worth noting, I think we're a growing municipality, and it's worth noting that our base budget will increase maybe a little higher than inflation in growth years, but then that growth is offset by growth in assessment, and that's what you've been seeing for the last several years, 4 or 5 years, where our base budget, the tax levy itself goes up, the impact on the taxpayer it doesn't go up in the same level because of the impacts of growth. So, and that's how the municipality, a growing municipality, is allowed to build capacity in its organization without having a high impact on existing taxpayers.
Any other questions? No? Seeing none, we'll go to number 6. Page 12 to 27. Who's going to speak to that?
Your Worship, through you, I think at this point, unless council has wishes to deliberate the budget further, we would be looking for council to make a few resolutions. The first would be to the recommendation, which was discussed at the first meeting, to fund these lingering capital projects that require further funding. The next that's item 6. The next item would be item 7, which is excluded expenses from the 2020 budget, which is a regulatory obligation that we have to disclose the fact that we're not funding certain liabilities. Some of these liabilities don't really have price tags attached to them, and explained in the Treasurer's report. And then last, Section 8, we would ask for council to make a recommendation of approval for the budget as laid out and then that would be a committee of the whole recommendation that would go to council at its meeting next week.
So I need someone to make a motion, Councillor Coleman, to take the 374-102, seconded by Councillor Ferrier. Any discussion? Councillor Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We took, according to the slides that Robin showed us, 150,000. Is that from that same fund? Because I'm wondering how much was in there. I thought that when we took the 150 out, I'm surprised that there's still 374 left in there. Maybe I'm thinking of other numbers.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I can't give you the exact number, but there was 700 and some odd thousand in that reserve before this is taken out and before the 150. So there's still money left in there after both of those items are taken out.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions before we call the vote? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And the second one, number 7, is to make a motion to accept the budget.
No, your number 7 is excluded expenses. It's a formality we have to address every year in the budget.
20%, yeah. Councillor Gatward? Thank you. Looking for a second. Councillor Wheat? Any discussion? Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For my education again, if we don't budget these in our regular operating budget, where do we budget them?
Michael?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We budget for the post-employee benefits, so those are in the budget, as well as the amortization is covered off by our capital budget. It's the solid waste that is not budgeted because, like Michael mentioned, it's largely unknown.
Your Worship, I can add. So in terms of the future landfill costs, a few years ago, we did have a surplus that was driven by materials that we had, had materials come in to the landfill from a major project, and it resulted in a surplus. So we did open a reserve up at that time. We put, I think, about $600,000 into that reserve for what we would call unknown future costs related to the closure of the landfill. The reality is nobody really knows what the future costs of a closed landfill are going to be, because it really depends on what the closure plan for the landfill is and what the long-term monitoring and rehabilitation costs are. So it's difficult to budget for that, and so most municipalities don't. But the province, as I understand, requires us to acknowledge that we're not putting annual money away for that, because I think our perception is when we start to know those costs, we'll start to budget for them as we get closer to the landfill being closed, so.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Michael. So the 4.9 million that's mentioned here, that's a best estimate?
Yeah.
Your Worship, it is just a best estimate at this point.
Any other questions? Councillor Gatward?
Does this still include the Burford landfill, or is it just the old Paris landfill?
Through you,
Oh.
Mr. Mayor, it would be the future cost of all the landfills. It's like including beggars one day, like future, in the future.
Can you say that last?
It includes all county-owned landfills.
Except ones that were previously closed and closed off completely.
No, it would include those as well, all.
So I've never seen anything about the old Clint Township landfill in our records. Why? If it includes all?
I'm sorry, I cannot answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Your Worship, through you, Your Worship, I think the reality, Mr. Walton may be able to help me out, some closed landfills don't have any costs associated with them. They're closed, capped, vented, and they don't have any ongoing costs. So what this is stating, though, is we have some active landfills. They will be closed someday, and there will be costs associated with that. And we're saying that we're not currently budgeting for those future costs right now. We've acknowledged that, and that when the time comes, we will probably have to start budgeting for them as we get closer to that time.
Does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Someone want to make the motion to approve the 2020 budget? Councillor Coleman, Councillor Pierce. Any discussion? Any concerns? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion to reconvene as a council. Councillor Howes, Councillor Wheat. All those in favor? And we will adjourn until 7 o'clock. Thank you.